All right, fifth grade. Today we're going to be working with different shapes and how to categorize them. So this is all a type of math called geometry. And this can be kind of confusing just because there's a lot of vocabulary or new words that you guys may not have heard before. So I'm just going to go through each of the shapes and kind of explain how to fill out this chart that was given to you and sort those shapes based on this flow chart here. So one of the most important things that we're talking about, and this is called a shape hierarchy. And so at the top is the most broad category, and as you go down, it gets the definitions of the shapes get more specific. And everything that's underneath this quadrilateral is a quadrilateral. So anything on the top, anything below something falls into the category above it. So that sounds kind of confusing, but a rectangle has to be a parallelogram because it's underneath parallelogram. Same with square. Now, a trapezoid is on its own over here because it kind of doesn't go any further. But parallelograms have a lot of different subcategories underneath of it, as you can see. So we'll just start by just kind of explaining what that diagram is, and then we're going to investigate with some shapes. So first we have to define what a quadrilateral is. And a quadrilateral is a four-sided figure. So anything with four sides, and it has to be enclosed, which means there's no space. All the lines are connected. So on my screen, I have pictured all quadrilaterals. I did not have a rectangular shape on here. So what I did is I put two squares together to make a rectangle. I have a trapezoid, I have a square, and this is a rhombus, and also a parallelogram. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is quadrilaterals, and if we count, all of these shapes have four sides. So these are all different types of quadrilaterals. And one way to think about this, guys, is thinking about dogs and cat, or different breeds of dogs. So, for example, we can say dog, and that can refer to a lot of different things. But obviously, a black lab is going to be different than a chihuahua. Just like these shapes are all shapes or quadrilaterals, they all have different characteristics. Like, not all dogs are the same, if that makes sense. That's my weird analogy, and I hope that somewhat makes sense to you. Okay, so quadrilateral is a four-sided figure. The next thing we're going to talk about is a parallelogram. A parallelogram is kind of just what it sounds like. It has at least one pair of parallel and opposite sides that are parallel. Parallel means they can go on and on. These lines can forever and ever if we were to extend the shape, and they would never intersect or cross. Also, this is a parallelogram because it has two opposite parallel sides. So not only are the top and the bottom parallel, but the left and the right are parallel as well. We're going to talk about why a trapezoid is not a parallelogram going forward. So just know that this is a parallelogram, this rectangle. The square is also a parallelogram because it has two pairs of opposite parallel sides. This rhombus is also a parallelogram because these lines could go on across from each other and never ever touch. So that's parallelogram, two pairs of opposite parallel sides. Now, we're going to talk about a trapezoid now. A trapezoid only has one pair of parallel sides. So usually it's the top and the bottom, but this is like the traditional looking trapezoid, but there can be different ones. This set can go on and on forever. However, if we were to extend the left and the right sides, as you could see, they would intersect. And so that's why trapezoid's kind of all off on its own, is because it does not have all opposite parallel sides. So that's why it's in its own category over there. Next thing we're going to talk about is a rectangle. Now, a rectangle is a parallelogram, but it's got a little more specific attribute. It's a little more different than just a parallelogram because we can have parallelograms that look like this, and they're kind of slanted. What do you notice about the angles in this compared to the angles over here? Think about it. If you're thinking that these have more sharp corners, these are called 90-degree angles. And these are obviously not 90-degree angles. They're either bigger or smaller. So a rectangle has to have 90-degree angles. It has to look like a box, basically. A parallelogram, these can still be parallel, but the angles don't really matter. So the angles matter in a rectangle. The next thing we're going to talk about is a square. What do you notice about the sides on a square versus a rectangle? Well, this square is a rectangle still because it has all 90-degree angles. However, it has one more specific attribute. It also has all equal sides. So squares have equal angles and equal sides. So the angles have to be the same on a square and also the side lengths. If we were to measure here to here and here to here, they would all be the same. On a rectangle, that's not the case. The bottom and the top are longer than the left and the right side of the rectangle. So that is why a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square, if you've ever heard that phrase before. Next thing we're going to talk about is a rhombus. Now, a rhombus has all parallel sides, and they're all equal sides. However, the angles don't have to be equal. These angles are smaller than these angles. So the rhombus, a square is a type of rhombus. But the rhombus is unique in that it doesn't have to have 90-degree angles all the way around. But it is equal on all sides. So it is equal-sided figure. All right. And that's kind of just kind of how you would categorize these. So let's go down. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral with two pairs of opposite parallel sides. A trapezoid has one pair of opposite parallel sides. Remember, that was the difference between them. Okay, if we go into parallelograms, a rectangle is a parallelogram with equal angles, all 90-degree angles. Remember, it has to look like a box. A square is a rectangle with equal sides. A square is a rhombus with equal angles. A rhombus is a parallelogram with equal sides. So that's kind of how you would fill in the chart. If that's confusing, I know this is a lot of information to put in one video. And like I said, it's not the same in the classroom. I would spend several days, probably over a week, teaching this. So just know that this is a bandage solution to trying to teach you this math concept. So I hope it's enough to just get you kind of thinking about shapes and how they're related to each other. And going back to that metaphor where they're all quadrilaterals or they're all dogs, but they're all different types of dogs or shapes. So just remembering that analogy as you work with the shapes. And if you have any questions, it's your last packet, so just try your best. I'm not grading correctness, so if you can just complete it and try your very hardest, I know that you'll do great. And I've loved teaching you this year, and this is my last video. So for those of you that have been watching, I appreciate it, and thanks for listening, and I hope that it has been helpful during this whole pandemic. And we'll see you next year.